Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the Russian economy, and specifically to talk about the labour crisis, which has been labelled by the Moscow School of Higher Economics as a personnel famine. And this chart, which shows Russia's unemployment rate over the past 12 months, shows that the latest figures for October 24 reveal that the unemployment rate is now down to 2.3%. And if we expand the scale of this chart to show the full data since records began following the breakup of the Soviet Union, you can see that 2.3% is actually the lowest in Russia's history. Now, ordinarily, you may think that low unemployment represents a positive thing for an economy because it means that everybody is employed. But if you don't have enough people to actually fill the jobs, then it becomes a major problem. And Igor Shevkalev, the president's special envoy for the Sverdlovsk region, recently stated that there are 9 vacancies for every single unemployed person in a region that has 40 million people. And this represents a really serious problem for Russia because, as we've discussed in previous videos, because of the low birth rate and the high death rate, the population in Russia is declining. This chart shows Russia's population pyramid, which splits Russia's population into 5-year age groups from 0 to 4 at the bottom to 100 plus at the top. On the left hand side in blue we've got the male population, and on the right hand side in red we've got the female population. And as you can see, the biggest single age category here is 35 to 39, and beneath that we've got a tapering pyramid. In fact, it isn't even pyramidal shaped. And this is because since the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia's birth rate has been declining. So there are fewer and fewer people entering the workforce each year, which would be a problem in itself, even if Russia hadn't decided to launch a number of wars over the past 30 years. And this chart shows the forecast for Russia's population. As you can see, it's forecast to decline from the current level of around 145 million to 126 million by the end of this century. So Russia already had an inherent problem with regards to its population and its workforce. However, those problems have been made significantly worse by the war in Ukraine. Over the past 2.5 years, there has been a huge recruitment drive trying to pull in as many men as possible into the army. And one of the consequences of that was that immediately following the announcement of the invasion, there was a mass migration of people. It was estimated that around 500,000 people decided to emigrate permanently from Russia at that point to avoid the potential of being called up to go and fight in Ukraine. And then later in 2022, President Putin announced that he was mobilising 300,000 men. There was going to be an enforced conscription of people, and that led to another 700,000 people leaving the country. So 1.2 million people fled Russia in 2022 as a result of the invasion, and they haven't come back. They are individuals who don't want to hang around in case they get told that they had to go and fight in Ukraine. However, the situation is much worse than that, because it's not just because Russia has lost these people from the workforce, they've also been losing people directly to Ukraine. It's been estimated that since the start of the war in Ukraine, Russia has recruited more than 800,000 additional soldiers. Now, you might be sitting there thinking that that sounds like a very big number, but the estimates in terms of casualties and deaths has recently been put at over 600,000. So there's a replenishment element as well as increasing the number of people on the ground. And in terms of what's attracting people to sign up, it was recently reported that in the Belgorod region, anybody that signs up for a minimum period of 12 months in Ukraine will be paid a one-off bonus of 3 million Russian rubles, which equates to around $30,000 at the current exchange rate. Now, the Belgorod region is the single biggest payer. However, there are 10 regions in Russia that are paying more than 2 million rubles as a signing on bonus, so basically $20,000. And that is more than the average annual salary in Russia. And that's just the signing on bonus. You'll get paid a salary on top of that. So there are large financial incentives for people to join the military. And that's one of the reasons why the workforce in Russia is struggling, because the salaries that are being offered, the payments that you can get for signing up, are so much more than you get paid for working in Russia. One of the other major factors that's affecting Russian companies at the moment is that the defence sector is poaching staff, and we've talked about this in previous videos. The movement to a wartime economy means that the Kremlin is sponsoring thousands of companies all across Russia to produce things that are needed for the war in Ukraine. And the Kremlin is offering big money. And this chart shows the percentage increase in real wages in Russia over the past 12 months. And real wages take into account inflation. So these figures are on top of inflation. And what they show is that the latest data, which has been published for September 24, show that real wages increased by 8.4%. And when you add that 8.4% to the inflation of 8.6% seen in September, that means that actual wages increased by 17% year on year. And that 17% increase in wages is one of the factors that's driving up inflation in Russia at the moment. The other factor is, of course, the fall in the value of the ruble, which is making imports a lot more expensive. And the persistently high level of inflation, which is currently sitting at 8.5% compared with the target level of 4%, has led to the Bank of Russia increasing interest rates 8 times over the last 18 months to the current level of 21%. And Russian industrial leaders recently came out and stated that these high rates are hurting business. They are holding back on new investment because it's simply too expensive to borrow money in Russia at the moment. And the combination of high interest rates and high wages is now leading to a situation in Russia where some companies are unable to pay their debts. However, the Russian central bank have countered this, saying that they blame the labour shortage, not high rates, for an investment slowdown. So industry is blaming the Bank of Russia is blaming the labour shortage, but the fundamental problem here is that Russia is short of people. That's driving up wages, it's driving up costs. That means that inflation is going up, therefore the Bank of Russia is increasing interest rates, and this is becoming a really vicious circle. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because the ongoing labour shortage in Russia is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. What we're seeing is that the war in Ukraine is having a number of different influences on the labour market. We saw initially at the start of the war, a lot of people decided to flee Russia, so the workforce actually decreased overnight by more than 1 million people. We then saw people being taken out of the workforce to go and fight in Ukraine, and over the last 2.5 years, the incentives being offered to people have got larger and larger. These are actually really big figures in Russia right now. It's one of the most lucrative things that you can do. Sign up to go and fight in Ukraine, you get a big signing on bonus. Whether or not you make it back remains to be seen, and I guess you have to take that into account in terms of the pros and the cons of that big ticket check. It's not like signing a football deal where you're going to get a big signing on bonus and then be in front of loads of people playing football every week and becoming a superstar. You're going over to fight a real war where people are dying. So there's a lot of risk involved in that. But it is taking a lot of people out of the workforce. And we're also seeing the movement to a wartime economy having a huge impact, because those companies that have been chosen by the Kremlin to produce things for the war in Ukraine are being given lots of money. Therefore, they're offering huge salaries for people to come and join them because they want to produce the maximum amount that they can to get paid the most. That's driving up wages in the Russian economy and leaving a lot of other companies who are seeing people leave to go and join all of these companies that are working for the Kremlin. They're struggling to be able to fill all of their jobs. Therefore, they can't produce as much as they did. And at the same time, because interest rates have gone up, they're unable to borrow to be able to expand their facilities and offer higher wages. So we've got a really vicious circle that is starting to form here. And as we saw earlier in the video, Russia has a reducing population as a result of its declining birth rate and rising death rate. So things are not going to get better over the long term. In fact, they're going to get worse. And recently the Kremlin came out and said that it needs an additional 2.4 million people by 2030. So in the next 5 years, it needs to find another 2.4 million people. And that's at a time when the population is reducing. So Russia is going to have to rely on migration. It needs people to move into Russia. But at the moment, that isn't a hugely attractive proposition. In the past, before the war in Ukraine started, Russia did see a lot of migrants coming from a lot of other Eastern European countries. However, the risk of being conscripted into the army is very real. That has happened to a number of people, and so it's now less attractive. And also, the fall in the value of the ruble means that the relative value of the money that you're being paid, which will be in rubles, is going down. So if you're sending money back home, the amount that you're earning is actually falling on a relative basis. So that's making Russia less attractive at the moment. And as we've talked about in recent videos, the value of the ruble has fallen significantly recently. Russia has now put a stop to trading in rubles, so I don't think we'll see a genuine exchange rate before the end of 2024. But the value continues to fall in terms of the real exchange value of that. And so it's going to be difficult to attract in 2.4 million people because of a combination of those factors. So the overall summary of today's video is that the workforce shortage in Russia that's been going on for the past 2.5 years is now getting worse. It's actually been referred to as a personnel famine by a Russian report. And I think it's going to be very difficult for Russia to solve that problem. And the price of people is going up. The cost of wages is rising as a result of the fact that people are being offered huge amounts to join the military. And there's also a wartime economy going on. So the companies that are being sponsored by the Kremlin can offer large salaries. And those things are unlikely to change as long as the war in Ukraine is going on. So this is a really difficult thing for Russia to be able to fix. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.